This case takes us to a city called Gresham located in Oregon State. Back in 1980, specifically January 15th, a diligent young woman by the name of Barbara Tucker was completing some assignments in her apartment before a night class. Barbara was looking forward to finishing her final class for the day so that she could go to a scheduled meetup with one of her friends that night. Barbara had agreed to make the trip over to her friend's house where the two would then go out. So, as time was gradually passing, Barbara packed up her notebook and other supplies and made her way to the college campus. Barbara's professor walked into the room and took note of a strange detail. The class wasn't so large that it was impossible to remember students, so they found it odd when Barbara was missing. She had never missed a class prior, but of course, no one's first thought would be that something terrible had happened, resulting in Barbara's absence. It was more than likely that she just wasn't feeling well or had something else that she had to attend to. So the night continued and Barbara never showed up to her friend's house either. This friend tried to get in contact with Barbara but failed, and she too thought that maybe some sort of emergency had simply popped up. The very next day, a student at the community college was on his way to class. The path that he was taking was primarily covered by shrubs and other foliage. It was a mundane walk that he made almost daily. So just imagine the shock on his face when he finds the lifeless body of a young woman behind some bushes. She was clearly beaten, and medical officials later determined that she had been raped as well. And as you all may have guessed, this was 19-year-old Barbara Tucker. Investigators also found her book bag and purse tossed nearby. All of Barbara's friends and family said that she was kind and agreeable, so they had no idea who would want to harm her. Her parents shared that Barbara had a dream of one day owning a arts and crafts store after obtaining her degree in business. In her free time, she did a lot of knitting and crocheting and even played basketball. She stood at about 5'7" and was previously a member of her high school varsity team. Along with her parents, Barbara grew up with 7 siblings, all of whom she had a deep, loving relationship with. After the news of Barbara's tragic death made its rounds on the news, several witnesses came forward saying that they had seen her walking the night before she was found. It was reported that she seemed to have shown signs of distress. As cars passed by, she would wave vigorously in the air, signaling for someone to pull over and speak to her. But nobody stopped. This was because those motorists thought that Barbara was part of some college prank, and tending to her would simply be a waste of time. Several people even said that they saw Barbara sprinting out of this wooded area before she tried to get a car to stop for her. Others shared that there was a man hiding in the woods behind her. When investigators asked what the man looked like, nobody could come up with a significant description. At the time, it was getting dark and it was tough to make out any details other than the man's silhouette. Again, Barbara was someone who didn't have any personal enemies, and because of this, police determined that it was just a random chance encounter, meaning that whoever did it could strike again abruptly and soon. Essentially, no major leads came in regarding this case in the following years, and it went cold. Fast forward to 2015, over 3 decades later, new detectives were tasked with looking into Barbara Tucker's case. These new investigators gathered whatever DNA evidence they had, which was obtained back on the night of January 15th, 1980, and had Parabon Labs look it over. And the process took about 6 years, but it finally resulted in a suspect. In 2021, by utilizing reverse family tree engineering, officials had narrowed their search down to a 58-year-old man named Robert Plimpton. But before actually arresting the man, investigators started by simply keeping an eye on him. One day, Robert was chewing some gum and had spat it out on the pavement. This piece of gum was taken back to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab and was deemed to be a match to the DNA profile from the evidence obtained from Barbara's body. Once authorities were ready to make the arrest, Robert was pulled over in a traffic stop and arrested. The officer who carried out the arrest described Robert as a calm and polite individual. Not exactly someone you would instantly pick out as a murderer. Following his arrest, more information was dug up about Robert's past. It seemed that hidden beneath this polite facade, Robert was a very violent and hateful man, specifically towards women. There was one case back in the late 90s where Robert had taken a woman on a date. She said that afterwards, Robert drove them to an isolated area where literally nobody was around for miles. Immediately after pulling the keys out of the car, Robert tried to throw his entire body onto the woman, but luckily she was able to maneuver herself out of position and slip through the car door. The woman called the police, and once they arrived, Robert was arrested on site. However, Robert didn't face any consequences. His charges were later dropped as a result of poor evidence. But thankfully, this type of outcome didn't occur with Barbara's case. Robert was charged with first-degree murder and assault, to which he pleaded not guilty. Robert will be sentenced on June 21st, 2024, and it's commonly believed that he may be responsible for other unsolved murder cases as well. Barbara's sister Susan said the following: "We always had hope. At one point we thought he was dead. Maybe it will never be solved. I just wished it could have happened when the rest of my family was here, especially my parents." This next case takes us to a city called Stevens Point in the state of Wisconsin back in 1995. A 13-year-old girl named Jessica Mullenberg was the unfortunate victim of a longtime stalker and abuser. Jessica's parents, Monica and Dale, had divorced earlier on in her life, and Monica obtained primary custody of Jessica. Over the weekends, Dale would be allowed to watch over his daughter and spend time with her. At the time, Dale was living in a trailer home located in Eau Claire, which is another city located in Wisconsin. So on the weekend of September 16th, 1995, Jessica was staying with her dad, but Dale calls his ex Monica and starts speaking in a rushed manner. And the one phrase that Monica picked up on was, "Jessica is gone." Understandably, Monica was really frustrated with Dale and blamed him for Jessica's disappearance at first. Dale proposed the possibility that Jessica may have purposely ran away for whatever reason, but this made absolutely no sense to Monica. It wasn't like Jessica hated Dale or anything, and life back with her mother and stepfather was good. There was absolutely no reason for her to leave her life behind. So Monica tried to find out a bit more information and started asking Dale where Jessica was last seen, what she was wearing, what time it was, etc. And it's here we learn that Jessica was missing for about a day at the time of the phone call. Dale claimed that he was spending the last few hours trying to find Jessica himself, but feeling that he had exhausted all of his own capabilities, he finally called Monica. And again, Monica did not believe for a second that Jessica had run away. She starts yelling at Dale and accuses him of withholding information. And so, Dale finally caves and reveals a vital detail. Jessica was with a man in his late 30s named Stephen Oliver before she went missing. Stephen was a neighbor of Dale's, and this is not the first time he had come into contact with the Mullenbergs. Years ago, when Jessica was around the age of 7 or 8 and still in elementary school, Stephen was working in the same facility. The first time he had laid eyes on Jessica, the man quite literally became obsessed with her. Jessica showed a natural talent and interest when it came to writing. She loved it so much that she wanted to join a writing club hosted by the school, and it just so happens that Stephen Oliver was the one in charge of the club. So at every opportunity, Stephen would get closer to Jessica. Furthermore, Stephen would frequently walk right up to Jessica during regular school hours, and other students wouldn't be able to recognize that he was doing something terrible to her right in front of their eyes. They would just think that Stephen was providing Jessica with extra help with her assignments. Jessica would finally catch a break from this nightmare when her stepfather obtained a new job in a different location that would require the family to move homes. But suspiciously, Stephen Oliver and his son also moved around that same time. And with hindsight, obviously, we know that this is because he wanted to stick alongside Jessica. But Stephen had no idea where the family was moving to. What he did know was Jessica's biological father Dale's address. So Stephen moved close to him and just waited for the perfect opportunity to strike at Jessica once again. Jessica's mother, Monica, was able to sort of observe moments of this strange fondness, you can call it, that Stephen had towards her daughter. Monica's suspicions led to her confronting Stephen and respectfully asking him to give Jessica some more space. Monica also said that Stephen took this very well and was both understanding and apologetic. Stephen was a single father, so the attention that he showed towards Jessica was sort of viewed by many as a parental love. Additionally, back when Stephen still lived near Monica, Jessica was frequently visiting Stephen's home to play with his son, and as you can imagine, this was the perfect time for Stephen to carry out his vile plans. I'm not going to go into explicit detail about those visits, but what was once touching turned into full-on. Steven also set into motion this plan to brainwash this impressionable child. At first, he was saying things like what they were doing was perfectly normal. A combination of both fear and this brainwashing led to Jessica staying quiet about the suffering that she was going through. So immediately upon learning that Stephen Oliver had moved next to Dale and that he was with Jessica, Monica freaked out. She finally connected the dots and realized that Stephen was a and was targeting Jessica. Dale, on the other hand, was far less worried. He even went as far as to say that Stephen seemed like a nice guy and Jessica was probably fine. Anyway, if you recall, I mentioned that Jessica participated in a writing club that was led by Stephen Oliver. Well, it turned out that whenever Jessica visited Dale's trailer home, she was also sent over to Stephen, who lived right next door. On the day that Jessica disappeared, Stephen had told her that a group wanted to publish one of her writing projects, and if all goes well, she might even be able to get a book published, meaning that she could bring in a lot of money. Jessica was brimming with excitement after hearing about this. Stephen told her that they would have to take a drive down to an office to get some paperwork done, so Jessica asked her dad if she could go with Stephen. Dale, of course, said sure, but if Monica was being asked this, she definitely would not have allowed for Stephen to walk away with her daughter. So Monica calls the police and tells them that her teenage daughter Jessica was missing and likely had been abducted by a man named Stephen Oliver. According to Dale, Stephen said that they were going to Madison, which can be anywhere from a 3 to 4 hour drive from Eau Claire. These authorities notified the officers in Madison and told them to keep an eye out for both Stephen and Jessica, but they never found either of them. And after several days had gone by, Jessica's family received a letter that was supposedly written by Jessica herself. In it, she told her parents and police to leave her alone and that she was safe. Jessica even said that she chose to run off of her own free will. But Monica knew that this letter was complete BS and more than likely was influenced by Stephen. After sharing her concerns about Stephen being a police continued their investigation and put up these missing persons posters that also featured Stephen. As part of the investigation, authorities went back to Stephen's trailer home where they found his son and ex-wife. And according to Stephen's ex, he had told her that he planned to be gone for at least 4 to 6 months on a business trip. Also tucked away in his dresser were receipts and invoices to items that, when viewed together, make it clear that he was trying to kidnap someone. Amongst those items were zip ties, rope, duct tape, and much more. It now became obvious that Stephen had planned this kidnapping out ahead of time and was prepared to be on the run for an extended period. And in later interviews, even Jessica shared that she had doubts that this trip was really to meet up with a publisher. When she asked Dale if she could go with Stephen, he almost shooed her away, encouraging her to go off with him. During the drive, Stephen Oliver had tied Jessica's feet and arms when she had fallen asleep. When she finally woke up, Jessica knew that she had just been ripped away from her family. Stephen started insulting the girl, saying that she is not loved by anyone and never has been. Every single day, Stephen kept saying that nobody was out looking for her because nobody cared about her. Jessica just fell into this extremely sad and depressed pit of despair, not knowing what was ahead of her. At the very least, in the past, Jessica was sort of able to walk away from the abuse by going home, but now she had been taken away. Stephen told Jessica that she was to refer to him as Dad and that his name was Dave Johnson, and from that point on, Jessica would be known as Cindy Johnson. It wasn't until November of the same year when a major discovery was made. Stephen's vehicle was found in the parking lot of an airport. It was a blue 1986 Oldsmobile Calais, but after searching through the airport's database, they couldn't find the name Stephen Oliver. However, he did get on a flight there. In an interview, it was revealed that Stephen held a weapon against Jessica when the two arrived at the airport. Keep in mind, at this time, Jessica's disappearance had not been reported yet, so nobody even knew to look out for her. And Jessica herself was way too scared to actually call out for help from the public. Stephen and Jessica ended up in Texas, specifically Houston, where Stephen got them a room at a motel. Jessica's appearance had been altered, making it not as obvious that she was the missing girl. Over the course of several months, Stephen assaulted Jessica in that motel room on an almost daily basis. And whenever Stephen left, Jessica tried to think of ways to escape. First, she tried the obvious, the front door, but that was locked from the outside. She also attempted to call 911 and her family using the phone in the motel room. However, Steven was one step ahead of her. He had tampered with the wiring inside of the phone so that whatever number you thought you chose resulted in a different one. So if you call 911, for example, you may have dialed something like 577. Jessica felt absolutely defeated. At first, she held out hope that someone would find her soon, but the constant onslaught of insults from Steven was making it hard for her to hold on to her past. Meanwhile, Jessica's mother and stepfather were doing all that they could to find her. That missing persons poster you saw earlier was being plastered all over billboards and trucks. Pretty much everyone across the nation was at least aware of Jessica being kidnapped. And the investigation would see a major breakthrough after the incident was mentioned on the TV segment America's Most Wanted. It just so happened that the manager at that Houston motel watched this show, and the manager mentioned that when she first saw Steven, he came across as strange. He told a story about how Jessica, or Cindy Johnson, was depressed due to an accident that the rest of their family had gone through, resulting in several deaths. The manager didn't really buy it, but it's not like she could do anything at that time. For all she knew, Steven was actually telling the truth. On December 28th of 1995, 104 days after Jessica was abducted, this manager got in touch with the team at America's Most Wanted. She said that there was a father and daughter staying at this motel in Houston that looked strikingly similar to Stephen Oliver and Jessica Mullenberg. But the two were introduced as Dave and Cindy Johnson. Immediately, this information was relayed with law enforcement, who showed up at that motel around midnight. There was this loud banging on the door which jolted both Jessica and Steven awake. Steven swiftly yet quietly got out of bed and told Jessica to remain quiet while he checked out who was there. Steven grabbed the doorknob and slowly peeled back the door just to be faced with FBI officials. Jessica was officially rescued, but it didn't truly feel like that to Jessica. In fact, at first, she felt like it was fake, like some sort of sick prank. It's been so long since she's felt any form of joy that she quite literally could not believe that she was safe. Steven had messed up the mind of this innocent girl so much that she believed that she was Cindy Johnson, a girl that has known nothing else other than abuse. And whoever Jessica Mullenberg was, she wasn't real. When Jessica was in her early 30s, she was quoted saying, "People think that life goes back to normal right away after you come home, but it doesn't." While this crime definitely left behind some scars, Jessica is at least able to find happiness now with her family consisting of 2 kids and a husband. When Monica was contacted by law enforcement with the news that her daughter was found, this wave of euphoria and relief just flooded her body, and she too also couldn't really believe that this actually happened. Monica said, "That's when I let out a scream. The only way I can describe it is your whole body is kind of numb and it's like you go deaf." In September of the following year, Stephen Oliver was convicted of charges including the rape and kidnapping of Jessica, which resulted in a 40-year prison sentence. The case of Karen Sue Klaas takes us back by about 4 decades. She was born in Missouri on April 22, 1943. In 1964, Karen met a man named Bill Medley, who was a singer and songwriter part of the Righteous Brothers. Karen did end up having 1 child with Bill, but this marriage did not last, and the two divorced just 3 years later in 1967. Fast forward to 1976, Karen was living in Los Angeles and had remarried, this time to a man named Gerald. Karen and Gerald would also have a child together. In late January of 1976, Karen had just dropped off her child at a local preschool. About a week prior, Karen and a few friends had organized a get-together. However, Karen never actually went. She had told her friends that she was excited to get some coffee with them and really looked forward to the meetup. So her friends were a bit confused to see that Karen hadn't shown up. They called her residence, but the call was never answered. The friends then decided to pay her a visit at her house, but after knocking and calling out for Karen, nobody opened up. Determined to figure out what was wrong, the friends continued to circle the home, peering through the slits between the window and curtains. And that's when they noticed a man exiting the home. He was disheveled and haggard looking with long hair and a beard. One of the friends was about to call out to him and ask if Karen was okay, but that's when one of the other women grabbed her by the arm and said that this man was trouble. She recognized him as a man on the local news who was said to have been roaming neighborhoods and creeping around homes. The woman rushed to call police, and when they arrived, they found Karen in her home, but the man had taken off. Karen was lying on the floor with her clothing having been torn off. She showed some signs of life, so medical officials rushed her to the hospital. Unfortunately, Karen couldn't regain consciousness and instead slipped into a coma. Police interviewed the woman for details about the man, and the information they provided matched up with the suspect that had been mentioned on the local news stations. Karen remained in her coma for less than a week before passing away. Medical officials determined that she had been and she had marks all over her body and neck. Witnesses also shared that they saw a man enter Karen's home sometime around 9 a.m., which is when Karen had returned after dropping off her child at preschool. Whoever the man was likely snuck inside during that period where nobody was home. Whether he had intentionally broken in when everyone was gone and waited for Karen, or he accidentally encountered her is unknown. Very few leads came in following Karen's death, leading the case to go cold over the decades. A major revelation came in 2016 when officials were able to go back and use the DNA evidence obtained from Karen's body to build a profile of the culprit. This research ultimately resulted in a potential suspect named Kenneth Troyer. There were several attempts at building a DNA profile in the past in 1999 and 2011, but both of those attempts failed. Investigators tracked down the family members of the suspect, hoping that they could reveal the location of Kenneth Troyer himself. But unfortunately, these relatives shared that Kenneth had died in March of 1982. He was shot during an escape from California Men's Colony State Prison. Furthermore, a few weeks prior to his death, it said that he was tied to numerous other crimes involving robberies and other violence. But after comparing the DNA to Kenneth's living relatives, it was determined to be an accurate link to the DNA profile they had conjured up. So it was concluded that Kenneth Troyer was the man responsible for taking Karen Klaas's life all those years ago.